Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm gonna be reacting to a video called Why Do London Skyscrapers Look So Weird? Walking through our Architectural Digest. I've never asked myself that question. Do London skyscrapers look weird? I think they look, if I'm thinking about I don't really know much about London buildings, but I think and especially skyscrapers, I don't really know. I don't have a point of comparison because I think all skyscrapers, they don't look all the same, but they all look like they're made out of glass and metal. There's just there's a cleanness to them. I don't know how to explain it in any other way. They look very futuristic, maybe a little futuristic. It's just that they have a lot of glass and a lot of metal. They look modern. They don't look, I'm not looking at them and confusing them with something else. But I think something's interesting because I think a lot of cities have very particular designs, or maybe the buildings they have a lot of a very example of a very specific type of architecture. Some cities have a lot of architecture is classical. Some other have buildings that look pretty gothic. Some of them have brutalism. So it is very I don't know how London it is. I think it's a good mix between classical traditional British buildings and also this. But apparently we're gonna learn the difference between London skyscrapers and the rest of the world, which I'm very excited because I don't know anything about this. So let's check it out and comment, like, and subscribe.
London has some seriously odd-looking skyscrapers.
Why are they weird?
Very unserious nickname.
To begin with, I do have to say, the concept of having a skyscraper is weird, as in general. Isn't that weird? I think it's weird in general. What I'm seeing, actually, looks straight up like a horror film or something.
The gherkin, the scalpel, can of ham,
see what I mean?
cheese grater,
can of ham,
walkie-talkie, but buildings this large.
Okay, so they're just named after stuff because they remind you of this, which I think makes sense. But a lot of them have glass. What I just mentioned, they all have glass, and they're very metal and cold looking. That's how I would describe them.
And this expensive, in the heart of one of the world's most important cities, don't just happen by accident. So, how did these skyscrapers end up with such unique design?
It looks so different. Obviously you have the London Bridge, which is such an old structure, and you have those weird looking futuristic buildings in the background. I think it's interesting, but it's wow, what a difference.
I'm Nick Potts, I'm an architect, and today we're taking a walking tour of London's most interesting skyscrapers.
The cheese grater, I wonder what's up with that.
To understand why these buildings look the way they do, first we need to understand three major factors about building in the city of London.
Okay.
First, unlike some other major cities around the world, London doesn't have a uniform street grid. Each lot has a unique shape and unique dimensions.
Oh.
Some lots are rectangular, others are triangular, some are just bizarre.
Okay.
Second,
isn't that the case for all cities? I mean, most of them downtown tends to be pretty everything's in the square, but I think some cities do have weird designs.
in addition to, or maybe because of these irregular lot sizes, what gets built on them is subject to a huge amount of negotiation.
Okay.
In a city like New York, there's a defined buildable envelope that regulates the bulk.
But I think New York is the outlier because it's New York and you have the Central Park and it's just a rectangular thing, and then everything's square and that's the center. I think New York is the outlier, and a lot of cities are not like that, actually.
Shape, the size, the height of new buildings. London doesn't have those sorts of rules, so every new large building that impacts the skyline is up to negotiation. And the third factor is that within the square mile of the city of London, there were no skyscrapers until the 1980s. Before the 1980s, nothing this tall could legally be built in the historic square mile of the center of London.
We are right over the...
Because it's historical. No, I'm sad. I go back in time, fix it. I don't want to it should remain like that.
Center of the hub of the world, the city of London. No view of London would be...
I'm actually so surprised by the 1980s fact, because it's one of the biggest cities in the world, and you're telling me they didn't have skyscrapers up till 40 years ago? That's crazy.
Complete, without a view of Sir Christopher Wren's masterwork, historic old St. Paul's.
These buildings only started going up when those laws were changed, and actually the political organization of the city changed to enable it.
Oh,
and so for the first time, with the creation of the Greater London Authority, London had something it hadn't had before, a mayor. And
they
given
have
the
a
trend
major
towards globalization that was occurring, the new London plan saw the opportunity to cement London as a...
I'm wondering, actually, when did skyscrapers tend to become a thing? Was it like in the 1950s, I would say? I don't know. When was the Chrysler? The Chrysler is like the Art Deco, and I think it's older than the 1950s. Beautiful building. But yes, I want to know when the skyscrapers like fashion started.
Global financial capital with a downtown. So in the London plan, there's no clear definition about what a tall building is, only a somewhat puzzling statement about the higher the building, the greater the scrutiny. But they did, however,
Makes
create a
sense.
framework of 5 major tenets that would feed into the approval process for any major
It's like if it's bigger than the London Bridge, if it's taller, then it's like tall. But I don't know. Whatever you
tall
say.
building. The functional impact, the visual impact, the cumulative impact, the environmental impact, and public access.
Just out of this, I would say, speaking obviously from like the most, I don't know, like shallow point of view, how visual it looks. That's my number one thing. Obviously, if I lived there, it would be a different thing. But just, I think visually, I think it's the most important, especially for this video.
This is 30 St. Mary Axe, known to many as the Gherkin because it looks like,
looks like a pickle?
A pickle. But there's actually
Okay.
a good reason why it looks like this. This was designed by Lord
More than a gherkin, I think it looks like a spaceship.
Norman Foster and completed in 2001. This was
Oh, so
designed to be a
recent.
symbol of sustainability. And 30 St. Mary Axe really leaned
you made
into
me
the
this.
idea of environmental impact as the
See what I mean? So weird. You have like this giant structure made out of glass and mirrors, like right behind this old-timey looking thing that looks like it's been there for like 400 years. It's quite weird.
path towards approval simply through its formal massing.
It looks like a mirror ball. I love it.
The rounded shape, the curves, minimize wind at the base of the building, which was
Okay.
a really crucial thing
It's
for
functional.
the regulatory agency to get behind. And the second of these was really about the performance of the building in terms of environmental responsibility and trying to
Good.
minimize the use of fossil fuels to heat
As it
and air
should be.
condition in the way that you typically would in a glass enclosed rectangular skyscraper.
Yeah, I think like glass enclosed, I think makes it hotter, I would think, maybe.
So if you look at the black stripes running up the building, within those are multi-story atriums. And these were meant to allow airflow to move up and through the building, almost like a chimney. And in addition to that, there were windows that were designed to open and shut to allow air to move in and through the building, minimize the use of air conditioning.
It also reminds me a little bit of like a hive, like a honey, like a beehive, I think.
Also, if you look closely
Sort
at
of.
the building, you don't see any louvers, and they achieved this shape and this sleekness by actually moving the cooling towers and the heating plant to an adjacent 6-story building. So even
my
though the
God.
building communicates sustainability, its performance is still very much traditional and
Yeah.
just hidden.
Or do they just have offices there? Like, what do they do over there?
This is the Leadenhall
Okay,
building,
yes.
which some
I know,
people
like
have
the
taken
cheese
to calling
grater.
the cheese grater. This building was designed by Richard Rogers and Partners, and it was
It looks like a solar plant. Solar plant? Yeah, those solar plant, those solar panels.
completed in 2013. The design here might look like an odd choice, but it makes a lot more sense if you look at it up against another building. St. Paul's Cathedral is just a few blocks away, and the shape
Oh.
of the Leadenhall building is actually a gesture of respect, looking back towards St. Paul's Cathedral. So thinking back to the approval guidelines in the City of London for a tall building, the visual
How is it?
impact is one of these core tenets, and this is the one that the Leadenhall building really leaned into. Across London, there are these protected view corridors, essentially making sure that St. Paul's is visible from various
Oh.
vantage points across the entire metropolitan
I love this because I was mentioning I think the visual part I think would be the most important.
region. And these view corridors, in the approval for any tall building, need to be
Yeah,
kept
so-
clear, both in front and behind.
Love this,
Working on top
incredible
of London's
planning.
tall buildings is not the most comfortable of jobs. But when the sun shines and the air's clear, the views around and below are well worth compensations. Looking
God, there's so
across
much
London,
stuff.
St. Paul's stands out with proud dignity.
The thing of like this thing being there for I don't know how old it is, but the fact that it's been there for like so long, it makes me want to cry a little bit. It's just to think of like I don't know, 200 years ago, people were just like looking at the same thing that we do. I don't know. It's just a beautiful sort of like thought.
So the Leadenhall building, by leaning away from one of these protected viewpoints, freed up one of these views, and it enabled the building to be quite tall. And there's also a somewhat interesting parallel with
like
this
this.
building and another building by Richard Rogers just a few streets away, the Lloyd's of London headquarters. skyscrapers, which is almost an extreme version of an inside-out building with exterior stairs.
Oh my god, okay, I
and a
love
fairly
that one.
wacky exterior shape.
It looks so
Leadenhall
weird.
building kind of simplifies. It's almost like a mature version of the same sort of idea. You have your very functional office floor plate with
I
all
see
of
what
the
you-
mechanical
yeah, I see
guts stuck on the outside of it. Over here, it's only on one side to essentially maximize the
I hate to say it, but I prefer the other one, the wacky one.
efficiency of these rectangular floor plates, as opposed to Lloyd's, which is a little bit more artful and composed
Lloyd's.
with the distribution of stairs and ductwork. And this
It looks like an engine or something.
is a very British through line of modern architecture, going back to, you could even say, the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park in 1851, which was this exploration of metal and glass and
It's
this
so
sort
classical.
of techno-futurism of Britain.
I can see sort of the inspiration, but I think, well, maybe looking back on it now, yes, I'm seeing that they're still very classical, but probably for the people like way in those days, they were like, no, it's not a classical, it's super futuristic.
British architecture that building really started. But while the cheese grater gets smaller towards the top to preserve these historic sight lines, the next building we're going to look at turns that idea upside down, literally.
Is that upside down? The walkie-talkie.
Behind me is
okay.
20 Fen Church,
Rectangular?
which some people have taken to calling the
Oh.
walkie-talkie.
Like
And this is
this.
one of the only skyscrapers in London that you can actually visit the top of for free. That is, if you can get a ticket. The building was designed by Raphael Vignoli. It was completed in 2015. And if you notice, the top of this building is larger than the base, which is quite unusual for
This
a
is so
tall building.
strange.
But these curves are not about preserving historic views.
It looks like a mammoth compared to the rest of the city that's surrounding it.
This design is actually a clever way to create a public space within the footprint of a private building. In the London plan, there's actually
Okay.
a requirement for public space. And the magic here is that they've managed to create a total area of public space that's actually bigger than the lot that it's built on. Directly underneath the almost
Of
dome
course,
at the
because it's
top of
like
the building
this.
is public park. So it's actually interesting that the top of the building is the size of the lot and the bottom is smaller. It's
Oh
the
my God, that's
opposite of what we're
incredible.
used to when we think of tall buildings that get smaller as you ascend.
Yes.
And because of this essentially trick of geometry, there's about 1.5 times the amount of public space than the lot even contains. One of the other
Insane.
aspects of the visual metrics for any tall building getting permission for the London plan is actually design quality. Because there wasn't a set visual metric that this was assessed against, what the developers ended up doing is actually hired other famous architects, including Jean Nouvel, who did not design this building, to essentially write an ode of praise towards the building design, saying this would be a contribution to generations of
Okay.
Londoners to build this quote-unquote masterpiece. And this is just a small bit of what it takes to build a
Like, it's a
skyscraper
masterpiece.
in a city like London.
It's very funny, like that last bit at the end of like they made him like say, "Hey, say some masterpiece." It's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Wondering if he really actually thought of this, or like they made him say that. Like they, I don't really know I don't know the logistics. Did they just did he got like bribe into like saying it was, or did he actually did thought like, no, this is actually an incredible, like a marvelous thing, and this is a masterpiece. I kind of like agree. I mean, knowing nothing else like civil, like engineering or architects or anything, I do like I think that's genius. Actually, I think it makes a sense because it's something that it's so like I think easy. You know, it looks easy. Like, oh, how would I thought of this? It's like, well, I didn't thought of this, and it wouldn't have occurred to me. But it's so simple. It's the idea of yes, we're going to use science behind this and. Why do buildings have to be in a certain like a specific way? I think like buildings don't have to get like smaller as they are taller. Like no, you can actually like make them spread out. So it's like, oh yeah, why didn't I think of this before? It's one of those solutions that I think are like they seem very simple, but only because someone like has thought of this before. So it's like, oh yeah, of course. That makes you feel so stupid when you're seeing it because it's like, oh, very very simple solution, very easy. I think I love it just because of like the wonder of it all of the actual space is larger than the actual lot, which I think it's like when I tell you this, it sounds like magic. It's like, oh my God, you're lying to me, like you're pulling my leg. But it's like, no, through science and the magic of engineering, we're gonna do this, and it is like that. And it's like, wow, that's incredible. And I love the park. I would have loved to see like a little bit more of the actual park, like that's on top. But it looks like a fancy like office, sort of like lobby, but with like trees apparently. Well, they weren't trees, they were just plants, but there was like some greenery, and obviously the views gotta be incredible. But I definitely would love to visit. Now I know why it's so popular. But apparently it's hard to get a ticket, because they said like it's good news. It's free. However, like I think you need to get a ticket. It's not just like, oh, I'm going there. Again, most buildings do have those. Like I don't know, like again, 30 Rock, you also need to pay. But it's like you have to like pay, or the the Empire State, like you have to pay to actually get to the top. But it's quite I don't know, it's quite like, I don't know, it's nice that they make it free. Although it's like, good luck getting a ticket. I actually want to know like how booked in advance they are, and is it like a whole sort of like, do you have to sign up for like months in advance, or is it like, no, you just have to queue very early? I don't know, I would love to know the logistics, and also what happens, like obviously that's the top of the building, but in the other part of the building, like where is it? Like I doubt it's a residential building. Pretty sure it's like buildings, an office building with like a lot of different things that work over there, like a lot of companies like who have their offices there, like in this floor or several floors. Probably that's something like that, but probably they have like a little, maybe they have like a little cafe. Like I was thinking of like things to have like on the top of like on the top of the park, that's enclosed. But I was thinking, well, maybe like a cafe would be nice. Like you're in the park that's in the building, and that it's larger than the lot it is in, and you're having coffee there. I think I would love this. Like it sounds so cool. But yeah, I now want to go visit the walkie-talkie. As for like the cheese grater, I think that was my favorite. Like again, visually, out of like the whole thing of them. And I don't know. I like that one. I think that was my favorite, especially as well because of the whole thing of like it preserves. You can see St. Paul's Cathedral. Like it's a whole thing about like how we can. I think it speaks a lot of like how we can make something like a modern building that's also sort of like takes into account sort of like those older buildings that probably people take for granted, because especially I think not if you're a tourist, but I think if you live there, I'm wondering if it comes to a point where you're just like, yeah, I'm seeing those buildings every day, and it's not such a thing about to be marveled by, because it's just your daily life. So you're not just like, oh, wow, incredible. You're just like, whatever, I don't really care. So this makes you see like, hey, no, like this is important, and see how we can actually work around this. And we don't have to, I'm not saying that they obviously do this, but it's like, we don't have to like replace or sort of like demolish everything that's antique or old in order to like build new things. It's like those two things can coexist, and we can actually create like newer things, having and taking into account those like older buildings and older things that actually make a town and a city. Because I think when people think of London, I think you're thinking of both things. You're thinking of like those incredible like skyscrapers that are like so tall and big, and again it's like this big corporate offices, but you're also thinking of like Westminster Abbey and Buckingham Palace and the London Bridge, and you're thinking of those buildings that are like so incredibly old. And those things, again, it's like a very interesting sort of like contrast, I believe, because again, cities tend to have, not always, but I think usually they tend to have like a whole sort of like a model, and that's where they stick to. Although I know it's in this day and age it's hard to, and Europe was like, what else, like Europe obviously, it's very hard to actually mix like those sort of like different architectural styles, because again it's like older things that you can't actually move or demolish, but you're not gonna make those things, you're not gonna make a building in that style anymore, because obviously it's not practical to the life and to the modern society. So it is kind of like, I don't know, it's a very different contrast, and I think again it's very interesting to me. But I think as well, I don't know, like if I like them. Yeah, I think I like both things. One of them, again, is like each of them has its own like little particularities, and probably has its own like, it looks nice, but also I love the older things and the older buildings. But it's kind of like, I don't know, what a beautiful view would have been like to actually keep London as it was, like as in the 1980s, with everything looking so old. Maybe it would have been like stuck in time, and maybe I wouldn't. People like if they had stayed that way, probably I wouldn't be thinking of this, and it would be like, well, they should definitely make more skyscrapers or more buildings, because it looks like it's stuck in time. Which obviously there's towns for that, and there's cities that work like that. But I'm wondering how and who actually gets to decide, and if the people that live there actually get to decide, because obviously like it's the government, it's the major, like it's, you know, it's beyond the hands of like the normal people that live there, but they should be the ones that decide this, right? Like they're the ones actually living and experiencing the city. So I think I always say like people that actually the citizens of this particular city should actually be the ones that actually should get to vote. But I'm wondering if people that grew up in maybe, let's say, the 1960s, probably they saw the whole city like change before their very eyes, because it was quite recent. So let's say someone that was born in the 1960s and lived, or maybe at like around 1950s, 60s, like they lived their whole life. And then at some point, like the city started to change, and they were like, "Wow, it's transforming before my very eyes." And now those people are probably still alive and thinking, like, "Wait, way back in my day, like stuff like the city just looked different." I know you can argue like every city is constantly, all cities are constantly evolving and everything changes, and you know the fact that you know the city wasn't what it was 60 years ago, 40 years ago. Which yes, of course, you can argue that all cities work like that, because again, cities are sort of like a continuous process. They're not an organic element, but they're just like constantly changing, because that's the nature of time. But it's a little bit of like, wow, it has changed so much, like seeing the whole like London skyline like change. It's like, wow, that's gonna be like a trip, I think, and I would have loved to see what the people that grew up back in those days actually like were, you know, what did they had to say. But again, it's a marvel of engineering and architecture, and again planning. And also I love the fact that they have like the five little tenets, which is like, yes, everything should be sort of like between those guidelines, which I think is incredible. I think London apparently should be a great place to work if you're an architect. That's what I got from this video, because not all the ones that have been built, but I think there are constantly probably newer buildings that are still being built. And again, if you're an architect or a civil engineer, then I think you should definitely move to London. There's like a lot of job opportunities from what I think. But now that was it for today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.